All right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Sales Pipeline Radio. I'm your host, Matt Hines. Excited to have you all here joining us in the middle of your workday, middle of your work week. Just a week away as we record this from a Memorial Day weekend, which is just crazy to think about. If you're watching us live on YouTube or in LinkedIn, thank you so much for being part of the show. We would love to make you part of the show. If you have a comment or question on our topic today in our conversation with Jesse, would love to get into that. And if you're watching on demand or listening on demand, thank you so much for continuing to subscribe and follow. Over 250,000 people downloaded and have access to Sales Pipeline Radio, and every episode of this podcast, past, present, and future, always available at salespipelineradio.com. Very excited to have. We missed each other at Summit a couple weeks ago, Jesse, but very excited to have with us Jesse Johnson. She's principal analyst of demand marketing at Forrester. Jesse, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt. Glad that we could connect after the event.
I'm glad we could as well. This is your second year on the Sales Pipeline Radio tied to Forrester Summit. We had you last year. We have you again this year. It's been a week and a half since we all left Phoenix, and head's still spinning on a lot of what we talked about. How about for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know that that's going to slow down anytime soon. It's like we're really just getting started now.
Nothing is slowing down in marketing right now, and I know you're spending a lot of time sort of watching the AI space, which seems to be going the fastest of all right now. What was just talking to people? I mean, there's so much work that goes into your presentation and the research you're doing sort of in your sessions, but as you talk to people at the show, what were some of the key things that you heard from people that you think that were particularly interesting?
Yeah, I would say for me, it was a lot of the optimism around kind of what's possible. So we introduced the idea of go-to-market singularity. So, things are falling apart, but, how do we start to put them together in this kind of brave new world that is very much AI augmented? One thing that just with my coverage area, one thing that I found quite energizing was that a lot of the fears have started to turn into that. Well, what does this mean for me? What is my kind of advantage that I can bring to this AI driven world based on my own experience and expertise? So I think a lot of our attendees, while it's a little bit scary at times when we think about the future ahead, it was great to start to see that optimism and to see them start to find themselves in that future and how they can really work alongside AI.
Well, you wrote about this a couple of months ago, right? You talk about the fact that the future is not humans versus AI. And I think a lot of people, as they get into it, are realizing how exciting it actually is for the profession, how exciting it's going to be for their careers. And so there's that. I see it all the time still, that switch from like, oh my God, it's coming for me, to, oh my gosh, I get to focus on the things I love.
Yes. Yep. Precisely that. And that idea of how do we balance that human judgment, creativity, ingenuity with how we're using AI within the organization. It's, while we do see in the news, companies that are letting go of their staff, and then they'll say that it's because of AI. I think really what's going on is just not necessarily a reorganization, but a reshaping of how the work gets done. So making sure that we are calibrating humans and AI based on the things that are going to matter most to the business.
So let's double click on this a little bit. Late last year, you wrote about what you considered the 7 AI agent archetypes that and at the time you said that will reshape. It is definitely reshaping it now. I thought that was a really smart way of sort of breaking down how to think about functionally how AI is helping. I'd love to have you sort of just quickly walk through that for people.
Sure. And thanks for the shout out and for reading the research. And it's true. Things go so quickly. I'm anxious to get this updated to, kind of represent that current state now. But when this came together, we were kind of in this place where everything was being called an agent, even if it was kind of our traditional chatbot rule follower type of interface. So a lot of the goal there was to figure out, you've already got a lot of AI in your stack, And now we have these really cool and powerful capabilities from agentic and generative AI. So how do we really rationalize that and figure out, what does that look like, not only in our tech stack, but how we get work done? So the 7 archetypes, as we think about kind of the base levels. So I hesitate to call it old school, but digital process automation. So we still have this idea of this rule follower agent that's really going to do this if then that, if this then that kind of
Yeah.
approach to its work. So routine, reactive, rules based. Some use cases there, answering scripted questions where we don't want anything to necessarily go off script. We have a very defined response to a certain question. Things like enabling very sequential tactic automation. So
Mhm.
even from a marketing perspective, as much as we say that the buyer's journey, customer experience, it's nonlinear, we need to meet our buyers where they are. That is true, but there are times where we're going to want to kind of distill those tactics in a certain order. Above that, so I'm starting at the bottom of
Mhm.
this hierarchy. Above that, we have kind of the producer archetype. So this is all about leveraging things like retrieval augmented generation to figure out how can we embed both ideation and co-creation of content or whatever it is that you're working on in your interfaces and workflows. So this idea of kind of working side by side with AI as you get your work done. So a
Mhm.
lot of generating content, that's everything from a social post to, now as things have evolved, being able to generate a custom pitch deck for a client. Above that, we have our savants. So as you think about,
Mhm.
kind of a specialist with deep expertise and mastery. So this is the agent that's really learning a lot about your business, about your customers. They have that domain expertise wherever that may sit, whether it's, listening in on those intent signals and figuring out what to do with them, or, how do we respond when we're getting this type of feedback from a community? So these are, agents that are able to conduct deep research for us to make the connections that we need to have made. A good example there, as we think about buying signals, understanding not only what is that signal of interest, but who else might be involved in that purchase process. Above that, we have our influencer agents. So this one, I got a lot of love for this particular category. We've seen these agents, in the past within conversation automation solutions. So
Mhm.
a big kind of differentiator there as we run up the ladder here, the influencer agent is actually ready to have external conversations. This is the agent that knows how to talk to your buyers and customers, what to say, when to bring in that human into the loop, and not always to prevent failure, but to deliver additional value at that point of handoff. And then as we start to look a little bit ahead,
Mhm.
we have the choreographer agent. So kind of a middle manager that's going to be coordinating the work of your, say, junior level agents, and really serving as that go between the human and the team or the crew of agents that we're working with. Looking ahead again, the planner and the innovator, the top 2 archetypes, were really considered long term when
Mhm.
this report was written. I think we're getting even closer to that planner archetype.
Mhm.
So, kind of an agent that can really practically develop and enact. So I think that's kind of the key there too, not just developing that plan, but actually being able to action that plan, likely
Right.
through that choreographer that's going to be, kind of reining in multiple agents with different areas of domain expertise. So they can put together, your account-based engagement plan and then also action that plan with that human approval and oversight. And then the innovator bucket, I think this one is going to be, really interesting to watch. So these are the agents that can actually come up with new ways of doing things, novel approaches, maybe even invigorating, established demand products. So this is going to be a really interesting kind of agent archetype to watch in the
Mhm.
future. They can help us to create tools, create tools on their own, maybe even create, a team of agents to execute on that account-based engagement plan that planner archetype came up with. So yeah, the future is certainly bright as we think about how we can augment our go-to-market with these various agent archetypes.
Yeah, I really like the way you've broken those down. And if you're a Forrester client, definitely go make sure you download that and get that to your team. If you are not, just go listen to that again and write it down. Because I think it's a really good way of thinking about sort of structurally how to sort of get the jobs to be done that are possible with AI, really rolling your organization. Talking here on Sales Pipeline Radio today with Jessie Johnson. She's principal analyst at demand marketing at Forrester. I mean, I think so many people are starting to rely more and more on these models, on agentic workflows. We're still, though, in sort of a trust but verify mode. Key example, just as we got started, before we got started here today, I mean, I've been using AI for everything, and including sort of show prep here to say, like, what are some things that I don't know? What are some things I should know? Claude told me you were retiring this year, that this was your 10th and final summit. Neither of us can figure out where it came up with that. I'm glad I caught that before I sort of like leaned into it. But like it's sort of like I've seen a lot of people say, well, like I can't really trust this. I can't just let this set it and forget it. How do you help teams balance sort of being proactive at and sort of aggressive even at using AI, but knowing that it's still not perfect?
Yeah, it's a lot of that comes down to, again, what is the human bringing to the table? And so very much, a lot of that comes down to that human experience and expertise that's going to, help that. Seems so weird to say human
Mhm.
in the mix, but will really help your frontline marketer to know when do we question that output of AI.
Mhm.
How often, if we're kind of getting into regular, I don't want to say rinse and repeat work, but as they become more ingrained into those workflows, how often do we need to have kind of that check of that AI output
Yeah.
until that trust is really really in place, and we're able to observe, here's the sources that agent used for information. So we're not just looking at the output of that agent, but what is the source that they found that information. So human judgment is certainly going to be required there. And what we're finding in our data too is, where does that split happen right now? What is AI able to fully automate on its own? So tasks that have a lot of data complexity and speed is really what matters. But those kind of tasks, engagement, the interactions, the workflows that really impact the brand, the customer experience, or are a little bit more risk intensive, that's where
Mhm.
we tend to see that kind of partnership. So, and I think that's going to vary with those individual human
Yeah.
employees that are using AI. Some of them may be a little bit more trusting of AI out of the gate, for better or worse, and others are always going to kind of want to be able to collaborate versus just kind of receiving and acting on whatever the AI kicks out, like my
Yeah.
retirement plan.
Like your retirement plan. Well, eventually it's going to be right, just not right now. We've got just a few
Right.
minutes left yeah, we got just a few minutes left with Jess before we need to wrap up. Where's the ceiling on this? I mean, I literally, as we record this today, there's a
Yeah.
conference. As we record this, there's a conference that has a 45-minute session that says we will build you an AI VP of marketing. That it's just going to do it
Mhm.
all for you, right? And some people look at that and say, "Oh crap, maybe I am in trouble." Like, how far does this go, and where do you think the future of AI and human interaction is going to be, especially for go-to-market teams?
Yeah. Yep. I think part of that is a lot of this is still kind of shiny object. It's cool to play around. It's, to think the art of the possible. What we find when we talk to our clients, they're looking for, kind of what does this look like as we continue to look into the future, but also what does that mean for me today? What is pragmatic and practical that I can integrate into my business, my workflows, my go to market, the way that we think about the world, even? And that idea of let's build you a VP agent, that's certainly compelling. That's absolutely that innovator archetype. But I think what gets lost in kind of the rush to build and design is the idea that we still need to integrate those agents
Mhm.
into our systems, our data, and also other agents that are in the mix. And we need to onboard that agent as though it, I won't say as though it were a human, but onboard that agent in context of the role that it
Mhm.
is going to play. So having a very human first approach to onboarding those agents, I think that integration and onboarding piece are really what brings the value. We can create agents all day long, but we need to make sure that they can actually deliver that value.
Yes, we do. Hey, before I let you go, so we already established that that you are not retiring. And so like I do have this section where I ask Claude, I say, okay, like tell me a couple things that people may not know about this person. So this could be two truths and a lie. Here's the three things it said. First, it says you're retiring.
Oh,
Then
oh,
it said you have a Master of Fine Arts in creative writing. Is that true?
correct.
Okay, so
That
that
is
one's
correct.
right. And it
Yeah.
also says that you do the Michael J. Fox Ride for a Cure every year to raise money for Parkinson's disease.
That is not correct.
Yeah,
I wish
yeah.
it were.
That was a really great set of things. So it was two lies and a truth,
Yeah.
thanks to Claude. So
She
yeah,
was.
always it's a work in progress. But it's pretty
It
amazing. Well,
is.
Jesse,
That,
thank you for joining us. If people want to read more of your stuff, especially new research and content you have coming out, what's the best place for them to go?
I would say, if you're not a client, follow the Forrester blog in
Mhm.
addition to what we put out on LinkedIn as well. So, yeah, a few
Awesome.
different
Awesome.
places
Jesse
out there.
Johnson, Forrester, thank you again so much for joining us. I'm really glad you're not retiring because we need more content and more insight from you on this. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Matt. Take care.
Awesome. And thank you everyone for attending and for joining us for another episode of Sales Pipeline Radio. We'll see you next time. See ya.